Oh, good. I can see that I'm live. Brilliant. Okay, I hope you all enjoyed last week and you got something from it. And today we're going to be talking about diet and nutrition. The following week, supplements, and then on the fourth week, I'm going to do something to pull it all together for you and go back over some of the questions that were asked. So I'm just waiting for Isabelle to come on, and I think she has come on, has she? Probably not. Okay, let me just have a look here. I can't see her as yet. Anyway, hope you're all good, and I hope that you got something from last week and you've managed to make some little change or tweak from last week to this week. So I'll wait to hear. So I'm just waiting for Isabelle now to come on. Okay, let me just see if I've got a request here. No. This is always the hardest bit, waiting. Anyway, lovely to see so many of you. Let's just wait and see. So it would be great while I'm waiting for Isabelle if, you know, you're brave enough just to tell me some of the changes that you have made, those that were on last week, from last week to this week. It would be good to know. Oh, I can see Isabelle. I can see you're there, Isabelle, but you've got a request to be able to come on. And that hasn't happened. Can you send another request to me? That'd be great. No, got it. Point now. Just wait to see how. Okay. Really enjoyed taking the time. Oh, hi, Isabelle.
Hello.
It's always scary, isn't it? I was just going to answer something here. Take the time to reflect each morning and write down my goals for the day. That's brilliant. That's what I love to hear. And as I said, we will go over more of this, especially on the last week. So what I want you to get from this evening with Isabelle here is just a better understanding about what you should be eating, the sort of diet portions, etc. And there is so much information out there now about what you should and shouldn't do. And I think for many women, they're very, very inflexible. It's either all or nothing. It's very hard to meet in the middle. So, Isabelle, you've got your little chart here, have you, with you?
No, I haven't.
Oh, you haven't? Oh, right. Okay, it's here. So, what we're talking
hang
about...
on, yes, I have got one of those,
yeah.
But I haven't got it with me. Oh, God,
Oh.
I'm so sorry.
No, don't worry. You can remember what it was on. So I think, you know, like, ask as many questions as you want as we're going through. But, you know, I think that in terms of fertility, like if you're trying, you know, you tell me, Isabelle, if you're trying naturally, and if you're doing IVF, I think your nutritional needs are different, aren't they? Because, you know, with IVF, you are trying to produce a lot of eggs, and that takes a lot more protein, for example.
Absolutely. So, yes, for a natural conception, I mean, nutrition is obviously we are what we eat, which is such an old cliche, but it really is true.
Yeah.
And so nobody needs to be perfect by any stretch. If we needed to be perfect, I think we would have died out by now as a human race. And I think this is where the stress comes in. People try and be perfect, but there are certain pointers that are really important. But for IVF, you're absolutely right. Normally you ovulate with one egg. With the IVF, hopefully you'll be, you know, depending obviously on your follicle count, etc. You know, one could ovulate with, you know, up to 20 something eggs, and your nutritional requirements are indeed different. It's not just about the protein. So protein provides the building blocks for growth. So the more eggs you produce, yes, the more protein you need, because actually the medication can only do so much. The medication will stimulate your ovaries to mature the eggs, but it can't feed them. But actually all our eggs are obviously casings for strands of DNA. And DNA requires folate and B12 and B6 and zinc and selenium, i.e. a lot of micronutrients. So the nutrient density of your diet becomes very important as well.
Yeah. And my thing about fertility being a whole body event is important as well, because we hear a lot about the gut microbiome now, but if you've got irritable bowel syndrome, diarrhea, you've got upset tummy the whole time, the likelihood is that you're not absorbing some of these key nutrients that are needed to make the eggs and to make the sperm. So look, what we do know, and I've got this in front of me, we do know that a lot of research has shown that the Mediterranean diet is very, very good for IVF outcome. So in terms of looking here about how much protein you should be having, is it 5 portions a day?
Well, I would normally, it depends how often you eat, obviously. I mean, generally we're recommended about 45 to 55 grams of protein a day, just naturally, depending obviously on how we are. For IVF, we would increase that quite significantly. And I would recommend that we have protein. I mean, realistically, your plate shape should have most sort of your non-starchy veg, some carb, and sort of probably an equal amount of protein. Although with IVF, probably I would say your protein requirements are higher. But protein with each meal, and if you're snacking, with each snack as well. Not that we recommend too much snacking, obviously, but the protein and the Mediterranean diet, yes, has definitely been studied alongside fertility. A higher protein, lower carbohydrate Mediterranean diet is actually the best diet for fertility per se, anyway.
Okay. So the other thing about protein is having it with fat as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
It helps balance blood sugar or even things out.
Absolutely that. Protein and fat slows down the absorption of carbohydrate. So carbohydrate turns into sugar, be it rice or potatoes or a banana or, or obviously a Mars bar, clearly, but essentially sugar, when it enters the bloodstream, eggs don't, and neither eggs nor sperm actually mature very well in a glucose-filled environment. So they don't really like this high sugar environment. Plus, when we've got sugar entering the bloodstream, the pancreas has to secrete insulin to take it out of the bloodstream. So you have these peaks and troughs, which in turn can affect overall hormone balance. And obviously the more balanced our hormonal system, the more efficiently the body works, and that will also, the better quality everything is, and that's from our sleep to our energy, but also to our egg production. And sperm production actually. And protein and fat helps keep these stable so that you don't shoot sort of sugar into the bloodstream so quickly.
Yeah, okay. So in terms of when you're thinking about protein, if you're vegan or if you're vegetarian, you've got to get your protein from different sources, don't you? And and that is hard for vegans going through IVF. You've got to be really, really, really disciplined, haven't you, in terms of what you eat.
You do, and actually I do see a lot of vegans obviously nowadays who are really, it's hard work, but they're pretty good. So, and obviously because in an ideal world you would eat your food as unprocessed as possible, and that's the problem. A lot of the newer options on the market can be quite highly processed. So you've got to be a little bit careful in that respect. But yes, pulses, nuts and seeds, those types of things. Obviously for a vegetarian, then eggs and some good quality dairy is a good idea as well, if you are not intolerant to it.
The interesting thing is as well, we've asked people to fill out their food diaries also. So, for somebody that is trying naturally 5 portions of protein, you talk about 45 grams, that means nothing to me. So what is that in terms of...
So if you are a non-vegetarian, to give you a rough example, let's say a fillet of fish maybe, or a chicken breast or something. I mean, obviously, Farmer Jack's chicken is probably very different to Farmer Giles because it might have more water. I mean, it's very difficult to say, but that would roughly be anything from maybe 23 to 26 grams of protein, something like that. An egg will give you roughly 7 or 8 grams of protein. That's a largish egg, so 6 to 8 grams of protein. From a vegetarian perspective, like a cup of lentils, I mean, that's a lot, a cup of lentils, to be fair. It's quite difficult to eat a cup of lentils, but that will give you about 16 grams of protein, 16 grams of protein. If you eat yogurt and stuff, obviously a traditional Greek yogurt, not Greek style, but a Greek yogurt will give you probably roughly 10 grams of protein per 100 grams. And actually 100 grams isn't very much. It's quite heavy. It's only about 3 tablespoons really. A normal natural yogurt will only give you 3 grams of protein per 100 grams. So we start looking at the protein contents of foods in order to for an IVF cycle, not for natural conception.
We're talking now about an IVF cycle. This is the amount of protein that you
Well,
need.
for IVF cycle, I tend to recommend, depending on how many eggs you're likely to produce, anything from 70 to 100 grams of protein.
So you've upped it. So 45 to try naturally, and up to 100 when you're going through IVF.
It's hard. It's hard, I have to say. It's not easy.
Do you recommend shakes as well?
I do. I tend to recommend protein powders, and personally, my preference, unless you are dairy intolerant or vegan, is a grass-fed, hormone-free whey protein, because whey is pretty natural. There are no nasties, and it's actually a very good source of glutathione. And actually, whey ingestion is linked with higher glutathione levels in the bloodstream. Glutathione is a very potent antioxidant, which is great for egg quality, by the way. If you are vegan, that is harder. A lot of the protein powders out there are pea based. And I'm not a massive fan of the pea proteins, because peas were studied as contraceptives back in the 50s. They were crap, to be honest. It was a rubbish contraceptive. And so they left all the studies back in the 60s. But the point of a protein powder is to concentrate a lot into a small amount. What if, you know, when you're spending a lot of money and a lot of heartache on this, what if you're taking in something that might have a bit of contraceptive property? You don't really want to do that, do you? So no. I tend to look at pumpkin seed powders or hemp or rice-based powders. I mean, there are options out there. There are options out there. And again, if somebody is a is not a vegetarian but is dairy intolerant, then actually collagen powders are quite good, you know.
So it's important as well, though, for vegans, very often short of zinc, B12,
iodine.
And so it's important that I'll talk about that next week, the supplements. But then we move on to fat. So protein and fats together to help balance blood sugar. So what sort of fats?
So essentially, actually fats, really important for hormone production, sperm production, egg production. You know, our sex hormones are created from fat, if you like. So actually a low fat diet is really not the way forward from a fertility perspective. But what we don't want is too much saturated fat. I mean, there's a lot more, as you know, a lot more study done on male fertility, because it's generally much less invasive to collect sperm than it is to collect an egg. But in the end, eggs and sperm are casings for strands of DNA. They're reproductive cells. So what's good or bad for the gander theoretically would be good or bad for the goose. And we know that men who have diet high in saturated fat, which you find from red meat, particularly processed meats, and high fat dairy, have poorer sperm quality. So I tend to look at that with the females as well. So we're looking at essential fats from oily fish, from things like walnuts, chia seeds, flax seeds, those types of things, avocados, olive oil.
Like full fat milk.
Definitely, yes, absolutely. Studies show that women who have full fat dairy have better egg quality than women who have low fat dairy, because when you skim off the fat, you skim off the female hormones, you're left with the androgens. It's not so great. Plus there's more, because you've got less fat there, the lactose goes into your bloodstream more quickly, so you get a sugar hit from a low fat dairy as well, which you don't necessarily want.
So for breakfast, how would somebody get fat? They could have an egg.
Yeah, they could, obviously eggs are great. They could have boiled egg. They could have an omelette with spinach and tomatoes. They could have a Greek yogurt, but not the 0%, the 4 or 5% Greek yogurt, with maybe some walnuts and pumpkin seeds and some berries to give them the antioxidants. Because I would always recommend that you include, I mean, we're probably going to talk about that in a minute anyway, but antioxidants as in brightly coloured fruit and veg, which is so important for the actual quality of both eggs and sperm.
So in terms of veg, what do you know, fruit and veg, you don't want to eat fruit that's too high in sugar, do you? So low glycemic fruit, berries, blackcurrants, time of year.
Exactly. Essentially, anything that's been grown under a tropical sun tends to be very high in sugar. Okay, so things like bananas and, you know, pineapples, mango, the famous pineapple. Those types of things tend to be much sweeter than obviously fruit that is grown in our country. I know we've just had a heat wave, but let's face it, not the greatest summer on earth. So berries, you know, all different color berries, but also things like plums and apples and things tend to be lower in sugar. But I do often see people who go, oh yeah, well, my 5 a day, absolutely not a problem. No, I have a smoothie with 5 portions of fruit. I'm getting my 5 a day. It shouldn't be 5. 5 is not enough, but it shouldn't be 5 the fruit. It certainly shouldn't, and you shouldn't have it all at once. I tend to say, you know, if you're making something like a smoothie, deconstruct it, put it on a plate. If you can't eat it, don't drink it. You know, space it apart, because your body has to process it. It's not so great. And it's always important to remember that you know, fruit is sugar. So if you're going to have a snack, for instance, like an apple, you'd be better to have it with a couple of spoons of peanut butter, maybe, or almond butter, or you know, that kind of thing, or a handful of walnuts, or something which will temper the speed at which the sugar will enter the bloodstream.
Yeah, and also olive oil. Olive oil is absolutely phenomenal, isn't it?
No, absolutely. And olive oil can it's been linked with better egg quality. Do you know it can actually help improve sperm morphology and quality? Extra virgin, but or ideally
cold pressed,
cold pressed, organic if possible, obviously, because then you are, you know, not talking chemicals. Cold pressed, you know, mechanically unfiltered extra virgin olive oil, and you know, a couple of spoons a day. Drizzle it onto salads. You know, put it onto your tomato puree for your lycopene. But yeah, olive oil is wonderful. One of the reasons why the Mediterranean diet is thought to be so beneficial, actually.
Yeah, and then we come on to the dreaded carbs. You know, like low carb is better when you're part of the Mediterranean diet. And I think, you know, what's hard for women with carbs is, you know, when you're going through your cycle, you know, up and down your menstrual cycle, very often towards the end you crave those carbs. And you know, food and mood go together as well, because you know, if you're motivated and you feel good, you can achieve anything, and you'll go on your, you know, you'll eat healthily and everything. But when you're failing, when your period comes, when you're feeling miserable about it all, that's when you start to make poor choices, isn't it? So
completely. And of course, you're in the second half of your cycle, your progesterone levels have kicked in, and when your blood is rich in progesterone, it's much higher in sugar. Hence why a lot of why people crave sort of, you know, sugar stuff before their period. And yes, I think carbs. I think a no carb diet. I don't recommend that.
You need energy. You need
the fiber, and it's not sustainable. It's not sustainable. You cannot do something that's not sustainable, because, as you rightly say, Zita, the mind-body connection is so important. And if you are miserable, actually, you've got to take notice of that, because if you're miserable, if you get resentful and stuff, that will impact the way your body is working. And
hormones,
completely. So I think some treats are actually really important. I really do, actually. And even going through the IVF, it's being kind to yourself. But I don't give rules, but I think guidelines are really useful. I think guidelines can be helpful.
What, you know, like if you fancy a treat, what is your treat? I mean, is it sort of like a square of chocolate, dark chocolate? A donut? Is it, you know, what?
Preferably not a donut. I mean, ideally, obviously, one avoids the sort of highly processed foods. I have been known to say to people, of course, if you want a croissant on a Saturday morning, feel free, because you know what? We're humans. But dark chocolate. And I mean, if somebody wants a couple of squares of dark chocolate every night, the worst time to have it, of course, is when we always want it, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. That don't have. Have it after dinner. Your body is busy processing hopefully a protein-rich meal. You won't spike, basically. And you could be good and have things like, you could stuff dates with peanut butter and stick them in the freezer. So you've got it's a bit like eating a sort of caramel. You know, it's quite nice, actually.
Nice.
It's nice, actually. But you know, so you could do good stuff as well, which you've got the mixture of you know, or even I often recommend people to have Brazil nuts, because Brazil nuts are great for selenium. Well, why don't you dark chocolate covered Brazil nuts? Have a mixture, have a couple, you know, and obviously one can be much naughtier than that and have really, but I think that or you know, even sort of chocolate covered rice cakes with peanut butter or almond butter spread on it. So you can mix and match as well, and you can be naughtier, you know. But if you're going to be naughty, don't get rubbish ice cream, get a really good ice cream, you know. That's the thing. Get decent stuff rather than really sort of full of rubbish stuff. I think, you know.
I agree. So just looking here though, when people filling out their food diary, we have put snacks. I'm not a huge believer in snacks. I don't think you should snack all between meals.
I agree.
It raises the blood sugar, so I would really discourage that.
No, well, I would as well, except what I tend to say, it just depends. Obviously, the thing is, in an ideal world, we'd all be eating dinner by 6. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We don't live in that world. The problem is we don't live in that world. And sometimes people are having lunch at 12:30, and they're not having dinner till 9. That is too long a gap. It's too long a gap for that. So in that instance, it might not be a terrible idea to have a handful of nuts or something which is not going to spike you, but which will just take the edge off, sort of, I don't know, at 4 o'clock or something like that, 4:30. But you're right, the body needs a break. It's not good to eat all the time, but also your body needs to digest. It needs to sort of replenish itself, and it can't be doing it if it's busy trying to get food sorted. So you're right, I agree with you. It also depends. I think you've got to, again, it's going back to sort of what is your day looking like. If you've got a day when you can't help something and you've got this massive long gap and you're not going to get home till late, you're going to be exhausted, you'll make poorer choices if you haven't maybe had something mid-afternoon as well. Maybe. Yeah.
Somebody's just asked here, what makes low carb foods?
Low carb, obviously, so the things that have no carb, if you like, would be meat, fish, eggs. Those types of things don't contain carb. Then you've got a sort of mixture of carb and protein, which would be your pulses, so beans, lentils and chickpeas, which are a sort of mixture of carb and protein. Your nuts and seeds have a little bit of carb, but more fat and protein. And then you've got the low glycemic carbs. So for instance, things like whole grains over refined grains. So when a grain is refined, it has its sort of outer husk taken away and stuff. It has lots of nutrients removed, but it's also got lots of the fiber removed. So I've been in schools and stuff before, and I've sort of said, right, we've got some wholemeal bread and a white bread, put it in your mouth and chew it, and put your hand up when it becomes sugar in your mouth. And of course, everybody who's doing white bread, the hand goes up quickly. Brown bread takes longer. So it's a slower release. It's still a carb, but it's a slower release. But the point being is if you have some protein with your carb, you have less carb. So, if you measure a bowl of rice or something like that, look at the amount and reduce, make sure that you're not having more carb than you are protein. That's the thing. Don't have a big portion of carb than protein.
Somebody's asked here about gluten-free diets.
So gluten has the potential to be quite pro-inflammatory, and if you are gluten sensitive or gluten intolerant, and we're not talking celiac here, which is obviously a completely different thing, but every time you eat gluten, it might be causing a pro-inflammatory reaction. And we know that inflammation is not good from a fertility perspective, from an implantation perspective. So some people do manage better on a gluten-free diet. However, I have to be honest, some gluten-free products are full of additives, sorts of things. So you are better to choose gluten-free grains. So actually, the only grains that are gluten containing are wheat, barley and rye. But obviously, it finds its way into all sorts of things. I mean, bulgur wheat is wheat, frike is wheat, things. Buckwheat actually isn't, interestingly enough. It's the rhubarb family. But, you have to look, rather than getting maybe a processed gluten-free food, it might be better. Oats don't actually contain gluten. They contain something called avenin, which if you are not celiac, you should be able to process that quite easily.
Yeah. Somebody's asked here about PCOS, and I've made a note here that, like nutrition has to be tailored individually, doesn't it? So different people need different diets according to what's going on. So if you've got PCOS or endometriosis, you've probably got a lot of inflammation going on in the body. So you need to be looking at anti-inflammatory foods, don't you? So what is an anti-inflammatory diet?
So an anti-inflammatory diet, we go back to the Mediterranean, if you like. So saturated fat is quite pro-inflammatory. So saturated fat found in things like red meat, high fat dairy, that kind of thing. Sugar is pro-inflammatory. Chemicals are pro-inflammatory. So you're looking at processed foods, and that includes things like diet drinks, really pro-inflammatory. So Diet Coke is not your friend.
No, or fizzy drinks.
Fizzy drinks, no. And fizzy drinks have been studied with sperm, and they do reduce the quality. We have to assume they do the same for female fertility as well. I would always, sort of equate the two. So yeah, fizzy water is fine. If you need something fizzy, fizzy water is fine. But yeah, steer away from chemicals. If you don't understand the label, then don't bother, you know.
Also things like alcohol, you know, that
Or
is low inflammatory, it's there's no nutrients, and yeah, and it's sugar. Yeah,
it's
so
you have to, you know, I think an anti-inflammatory diet includes, so omega-3 is very anti-inflammatory. So fish is anti-inflammatory. You know, sort of some of the nuts and seeds can be anti-inflammatory. Obviously, a diet, antioxidants are anti-inflammatory. So we're back to the color. Antioxidants are the easiest way of thinking of antioxidants is color. Think of brightly colored fruit and veg. You get antioxidant nutrients, but you also get antioxidant compounds in the actual pigment of fruit and veg. So different colors will give you different benefits. No. So red colors are so important.
Water is underestimated as well, isn't it? Especially coming into the autumn and winter, and it's been so hot, hasn't it? So you find yourself naturally drinking more water, but in the winter you don't feel as thirsty. And
nobody should, because we're all sitting with radiators on, and it is, I mean, you know, I don't know about you, I mean, my skin goes so dry in winter because you don't realize that it's sucking the moisture out.
Yes.
And I tend to say, think of your eggs as plump, juicy grapes, not shriveled raisins. We need hydration. You really need water for, I mean, we are made up of 60 to 70% water, and that is every cell in the body.
Yeah.
So another reason we need the essential fats is for the cells, you know, the essential fats, i.e. the nuts and the seeds and the fish and stuff like that, for the cell membranes, to have fluid cell membranes as well.
Yeah. One of the questions here is about losing weight for IVF. And that is so hard for some women, especially if they've got underlying autoimmune disorders, thyroid dysfunction, etc. So that's a difficult one. And a lot of women do intermittent fasting, which I don't think is good if you're trying for a baby. You know,
I think it's not studied. Yeah, you're right, Zita. It hasn't been studied. It's great. It's got a lot of benefits, to be fair. But the problem is that, you know, it's not been studied for pregnancy or you know, with IVF, your nutrient requirements are higher. So it's very difficult to get what you need in a very small window, if you see what I mean. I think you need to throw yourself into, you know, you need to throw yourself into what you're throwing yourself into, and sort of make that your object. You know, you can do other things later on in life, but for now, I think.
And I think as well is that if you're doing intermittent fasting, you know, you're depleting the body of nutrients for periods of time, and it can sort of affect your hormones as well. So, you know, it's important.
Yeah, it's unknown, and don't forget that IVF, when we go down the IVF route, it is not a natural way of being. You have to look at things in a
sorry with the phone. I'll just leave it for now. Let it ring. So, Isabelle, anything else that we need to sort of talk about? Any other pearls of wisdom for women?
Well, I think that and this is easy for you and I to sit here and say this.
I know that.
It's easy for us to say, oh, don't be too perfect, you know, and I know very well what it's like, you know, to go through IVF, and you want to do everything you can in your power. But I think, you know, it's as you say, it's the holistic approach. It's looking after your soul as well is so important. And the nutrition is one thing, and I think doing your best, you know, for me, I would tend to say protein and color every time you eat. That's a good, you know, protein and color every time you eat. Try not to leave too long gaps, but you're right, don't eat sort of all the time. Your body needs a break. Hydrate yourself, but give yourself some joy as well. Give yourself some joy, because it can be a very lonely and also very stressful process. And when you're stressed, you use up a lot of nutrients, like magnesium as an example. So magnesium is quickly. So lots of almonds and nuts and things are good for magnesium. Green leafy veg, whole grain, you know, make sure that you get nutrient rich foods in, but allow yourself a little bit of joy. I really think that's important.
I know. I absolutely agree. But you know, secondary things like portion control is really important, isn't it?
Absolutely.
People eat too much. You know, you see this plate and it doesn't have to be full. You know, you can reduce portion size.
Actually, from a weight perspective, you know, I mean, this is going to sound so silly and so simple, but get a smaller plate. Get a smaller plate. You like to see a full plate, you know, we are all different. Our bodies, our minds react to different things. But with portion size, get a smaller plate. You can always have seconds if, you know, and give yourself, it takes about 15 minutes at least for a little sort of neurotransmitter that we have to get to travel from the gut to the brain to tell us that we're full. So the quicker we eat, the more we eat, and then we feel full.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, you go to a dinner party, you've got a really interesting person next to you, chat. Suddenly, you know, you go, oh my God, everything's cold. Don't really want to eat everything, but you're not hungry, and that's because you've done it really slowly. So actually, we don't always need to eat everything. It's always better to have slightly smaller portions than if you need more, so be it. But overloading, also your stomach has to work, your body has to work harder. And it can be pro-inflammatory, of course, and you know that there's you know, you use up more energy. And actually, we need a lot of energy. The egg is the largest single cell in the female body, so we need a lot of energy for egg production. So you know, we want to allow ourselves that.
And also, you touched on eating late. I don't think you should eat late into the evening. I think you should have had your supper by about 7 o'clock. And certainly in Chinese medicine, it's eat like, you know, breakfast like a prince, lunch like a, no, supper like a kid. I remember the one middle bit. But yeah, so, you know, it's really, really important that you don't wait till night to eat it too late.
Late, and the body, we are very, our digestive systems are much slower because we are preparing, naturally our body is preparing for sleep, so we are not so efficient digestive wise in the evening. We don't digest food so efficiently, and it can make you feel sluggish the next day, of course. You know, what we do, you know, what we do on, let's say, Tuesday can even affect how we are on Thursday. So we have to, it's not all about, you know, that your body sort of goes on as it were. So, and the sleep, of course, if you're eating too late, it's going to affect your sleep. And
sleep is so vital. I mean, there's not a day when you don't open the newspaper now and see a mention of sleep. So sleep is important. And again, you know, when I was talking last week, it's taking that time to breathe and just feel that you're in a safe space, taking yourself off somewhere. This all grows the nutrients.
Completely.
You know, it starts to sort of fill your body, doesn't it? It's sort of you're topping up.
It's not all about what you put in. I mean, that's a big part of it, but it's absolutely not all of it by any stretch. It's about all sorts of other stuff as well, as you say. How, you know, giving yourself time, and well, that's your area of expertise, obviously. But you know, but it's absolutely, and I always say, yes, of course, nutrition is important, but the mind-body connection is so important, and that's about all sorts of other stuff as well.
Yeah, somebody's asked here about having leaky gut.
Yeah.
And could be that the reason that they had 3 miscarriages. Miscarriages are caused by many different factors. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's your gut. But again, probiotics, which we'll be talking about next week, are really important for gut health.
So our gut microbiome, as well as our vaginal uterine microbiome, but the gut microbiome is really important. And again, you can do reducing pro-inflammatory foods, reducing foods that, you know, if you know inside that, you know, you eat something and it just causes a bit of a tummy ache or a bit of bloating, maybe try and avoid it. Try and have something different. Use things that can help heal your gut. So foods high in omega-3. Bone broth is fabulous for it's very anti-inflammatory. It's great for gut healing. You know, there's all sorts of things that you can do to help with a leaky gut. But you know, I think it's looking at everything. You're right. You don't. Miscarriages can be all sorts of different reasons, and but so don't just pinpoint one thing that might be wrong. That, you know, look at everything as a whole, really.
And allow yourself slippage. You know, some days are much better than others,
and you will bad days, but pick yourself up and don't worry about it, because you know, people get themselves completely het up. I've had emails, oh my God, I had 3 bags of crisps yesterday, I've ruined my life is not worth living. You know, it's just let it go. Let it go.
Thank you so much, Isabelle. That was really, really brilliant, so informative. So thanks so much for that. And thanks everybody who's been listening, and I will see you next week, and we'll sort of delve into supplements and what you should be taking.
Lovely.
Thanks, Isabelle.
Bye, Zita. Lovely to see you.
Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.
Bye.